Let's stay on the Mass Casualty Commission and the future of the RCMP. Here to weigh in on that story and more are three journalists and three bureau chiefs here in Ottawa. Bob Fife of the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles of the Toronto Star, and Joanna Smith of the Canadian Press. Tonda, let me start with you. We've seen Thursday's final report pointing to RCMP failings before, during, and after the mass shooting in 2020. What do you make of the reaction we've heard from the RCMP since the report's been out?
I mean, even since the report's been out, the reaction continues to be sort of gobsmacking to me that the force is still not able to acknowledge its mistakes and apologize for the mistakes, instead saying that they did their best at the time and they've made changes since. Well, I think that this report is meant to signal all the other changes that need doing, and they had time to respond to it. They had time to digest it and read it. Even if the interim commissioner or the Nova Scotia chief didn't have time to actually read the thing, somebody should have been reading it overnight and briefing them and had a response that would deal with families' concerns and the public's concerns, and they didn't have that. So failure in communications, and that is more than just PR, that's a failure in policing.
Now, Bob, we've seen a lot of calls for the RCMP to reform itself over the years. The commissioners themselves even acknowledge that in the report. Why do we think this time is going to be different, or will it be any different this time?
Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be very different when you have families, tears rolling down their cheeks, the emotions of what they went through, and you have the acting deputy commissioner, Michel Duhem, says he hadn't even read the recommendations. I mean, get real. And this is the problem with this force. It is calcified, and somebody needs to really shake it up. This report is very far-reaching and makes a lot of really good recommendations, but it's not as if they haven't had these kind of recommendations before. One of the major problems is we've got to separate the RCMP into a separate FBI-type force, which has been recommended before, and the provincial police, the RCMP that do contract policing, need to be set up in a different format than we have with the RCMP as of right now. It's just too big and it's unmanageable, and people have complained that the detachment commanders in Nova Scotia will say, well, when headquarters calls, well, I report to the provincial attorney general, and when the provincial attorney general has a problem with the RCMP, oh, sorry, I report to headquarters. This is the kind of institutional problems at the RCMP, and there's a whole lot of others. I mean, what they talk about, the kind of training that is necessary, wow, like they're right. 26 weeks of training when they should be doing what the Finnish model, which is 3 years. What kind of, look at the improvement you would have in a police force if that's the case, but money is the issue, right?
Okay, Joanne, let me bring you in here. What do you see in these recommendations that's catching your eye this week?
I think there was some really interesting specific recommendations on what the federal government could do about it. I mean, if we're in a situation where the RCMP cannot be expected to reform itself, there were some key recommendations for Ottawa. One of those was changing the way in the RCMP Act itself, putting more on guard for potential political interference. You remember the scandal last year when it sort of came out that Lucky had maybe let slip in a conversation. She was disappointed that something that she had promised political masters she would do, she was not doing. The report found, no political interference, ill-timed, not the best way to say things, but probably not partisan, but at the same time drawing a clearer line between the public safety minister, the RCP commissioner, maybe even removing in the act itself this part of the oath that says she serves at his direction or whatever it is, would clarify things a little bit. And then on gun control, I found it interesting that they recommended specifically to create an evergreen definition for a semi-automatic weapon, right? That is something Liberals tried to do in the amendment. They did it badly. There was a communications failure on their part. They've withdrawn the amendment, but that's something this inquiry is also recommending.
And it's still not clear if this government is committed to enshrining in law a definition around semi-assault style weapons, semi-automatic assault style weapons. They're struggling with it politically at the committee, so that's a big challenge for the government. But the RCMP and reform of the RCMP has been a long-standing issue, and I'm not sure this government is committed to do that either.
And we're also waiting for a new permanent RCMP commissioner to be named.
This is really, really important. They blew the last commissioner. Brenda Lucki was way out of depth. She was basically a mid-level RCMP officer, was in charge of the training facility in Regina, and moved into headquarters with no experience in Ottawa, not a lot of depth in terms of criminal investigations either, and she was just out of her depth. If you're going to have real change at the RCMP, they need to have somebody who doesn't meet the check marks that the Trudeau government has, but somebody who can meet check marks that Canadians need is somebody who's going to come in and actually reform the institution.
Okay, let's turn to a major decision affecting consumers that's in the news today, the federal approval of the $26 billion Rogers takeover of Shaw. And I should add, Rogers and Shaw are two of CPAC's founding members. So Shaw-owned Freedom Mobile will be transferred to Videotron as part of the deal. And the industry minister says he's imposed conditions to protect Canadians. I'll get all of you to react in a moment, but let's hear from François-Philippe Champagne.
I want to be clear with everyone that I will ensure that a new fourth national player can go toe-to-toe with the big three and actually drive down prices. These conditions and enforceable commitments should not be taken lightly. If I don't see lower prices in Canada, what I'm saying is that everything will be on the table, and I will then seek further powers in order to achieve that for Canadians.
So, Bobby, you were at this news conference. The industry minister says he's going to watch Rogers and Videotron like a hawk. What's your take?
Well, I mean, they had some pretty important conditions put in there, like they expect to see prices come down about 20%. There are some strong penalties for Videotron if they don't meet their conditions, and of up to $1 billion for Rogers if they don't meet their conditions. So this is in a way has been a change, because we don't normally see government being as strong with the telecoms who have a monopoly. But we've all been here before. We've all heard this before. The proof is in the pudding. Let's see the prices come down, because we'll all be saying, "Hey, Mr. Hawk, you said you were going to bring these things down." And forgive us if we are skeptical of this.
Right, and Joanna, that's been, of course, long-standing criticism here in Canada, that we pay some of the highest rates in the world. The Competition Bureau raised this. The NDP is raising this. Other critics are raising this. How do you see this playing out politically for the government as they try to sell this to consumers?
I think it looks like a win for them, and it's sort of one of those, it wasn't a surprise today, but that's because a lot of this is really set in motion in the fall. So when Champagne rejected the original deal, that original deal was already pretty much dead in the water, right? And then he attached conditions that were already in the works. So here we are today. He gets to say, I've imposed, I've got concessions. It's technically true, but I think the proof will be in the pudding. The details of the price limitations, there's wiggle room in there. You can enforce a document, but if the terms are not clear-cut themselves, then lawyers will do their lawyer thing and fight them potentially. The other thing to consider is when you impose financial penalties on a business, makes sense, but a business is always going to decide what's more expensive to me, paying the penalties or implementing these conditions.
And hitting consumers for the penalties.
Yeah, Tonda, what do you think? Because the minister is saying he's got the power to enforce these conditions. He's willing to actually take more action to reduce prices. He's saying he's willing to use whatever legislative or regulatory tool he has in his bag.
Right, and that's unclear. I mean, had they had regulatory tools they could have used earlier, we might have seen them use them, right, on big telecoms to control consumer prices. But the fact is, no government really wants to be regulating prices and controlling the markets. And I think part of the bet this deal does is hope that in bringing a fourth player in, spreading its market out beyond Quebec into the West, they're hoping that prices generally will come down too. But that's also a wish and a prayer to a certain extent. But I think that it allows, to Joanna's point, it allows the government to make the argument, make the political pitch that they're on the side of consumers and that they're prepared to enforce this with, I think, more than the legislative tool that he's threatening. It's the contract. It's the ability to take the companies to court and to exact a financial penalty. But, like anything, I do think we have to wait and see how that plays out. It will probably be in the life of another government to deal with that.
Right, and we know that affordability was a big part of the budget. The government even promising to target junk fees like telecom roaming charges. And in the few moments we have, I do want to get all of you to give me a sense of this week's budget and really what you see as the political ricochet that might happen from this budget, or maybe there won't be one at all. Bob,
I don't know if we're going to be talking about it next week, are we? I mean,
let me get you to weigh in first. What are your thoughts?
This is a government that likes to spend, and it continues to spend. And, it's in the DNA. And at a time when, they're encouraging people basically to spend more on housing, when the Bank of Canada is trying to dampen the inflationary pressures. But what they've done in terms of encouraging people to buy homes is simply going to spike the housing market. And also all the green technology stuff, you have to be careful with some of that because, it's hard for governments to pick winners and losers. And often what ends up happening is that taxpayers lose a lot of money and people walk away with the money, but they don't have the jobs or the successful businesses that they think are going to come out of it.
Tonda, what's your one big takeaway from what we saw Tuesday?
Well, I think the budget's a combination of wishful thinking, that we're not going to hit a really bad recession, a mild recession only, and big ambition, which is the big play for the clean energy investment. And that depends on how much corporations are really going to invest and take it up based on a tax credit. And will that situate us to compete with the U.S.? I don't know.
Joanna, I'll turn to you. It is interesting. We do have the Prime Minister out selling the dental benefit today, but Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, also doing an 8-city tour while the House is on a break to, celebrate, I suppose would be the word, what he believes is his party's accomplishments in getting that dental plan and that GST credit in that budget. What are you looking at in the political debate here?
Yeah, the NDP is pretty happy. Pretty much everything in that confidence and supply deal is in there, save 3 things. 2 of those 3 things are mentioned in the budget. That's the anti-scab legislation and some urban Indigenous housing stuff. I know the NDP thinks not really enough, right? So they sort of see 3 outstanding things. So my question is, next year, what the Liberals going to offer? Like, where does this deal evolve? What needs to come next to keep them on side? The commitment on pharmacare is very vague. The Liberals could say, we've done it. The NDP could say, yes, we agree with you. Or with the same facts before them, the NDP could say, no, you haven't, right? So I think that sort of final step and how people interpret it will be where it goes next.
You could say this budget bought them a year. It's not the budget they're taking into an election campaign.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for this week at least. Joanna, Tonda, and Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.